Come now, all you mangy dogs. Swab the decks and hoist the sails. The guns on board be needing some proper manning. Pieces of 8 and a fine wench on your arm. If your work be not too shoddy. Careful not to flounder too badly, though, or you may have to dance the hempen jig as we see you to Davy Jones. Jeffy, my boy, on with the show.
Welcome, everybody, friends, folks, foes, and fellow pirate mateys, to this week's Friday night feature show, Pirate Radio Podcasts, episode number 182. Tonight, we're on the trail of the Templars with our special guest, author Walter Bosley. I, of course, am your host as always, the Robin Hood's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder. Yes, indeed, all good things in time. Walter Bosley finally manages to make it to the Robin Hood this week. A veteran of nearly 2 decades in U.S. national security. For the past 15 years, Walter has investigated various historical mysteries while managing to publish several outstanding nonfiction reads. Over this time, he's also appeared as a guest on the Travel Channel and TV's Ancient Aliens. This week's show will deal with what else but Walter's classic Templar-themed book, Secret Missions, The Hidden Legacy of Old California. Before we get started, let's just remind our listeners the website, as always, is WPRPN.com. You'll want to drop by there, check out what we have in place. Sign up is free. Be sure to leave your thoughts, comments, questions, and the like. Our email, pirate1radio@protonmail.com, is where you'll want to hit us up for any potential PayPal donations, or if you have any show or guest ideas in mind. We're still working on booking up the balance of 2020, so make no mistake, if you do take the time to drop us a line, there's a good chance we can get either you or one of the people you'd like to see join us here become part of an upcoming future feature show. We'll have James Hydrick coming up next week as well, too. People want to check out the May 2020 calendar we have in place via WPRPN.com. That is something that's going to probably pick up a lot of attention, as did our interview with him a couple of years ago. So in the meantime, though, without any further ado, I think we should probably turn our sights to our feature guest for this week, Walter Bosley, out of, I don't even know how to pronounce it, actually, San Bernardino, I guess, Route 66, California. Is that not right?
San Bernardino.
San Bernardino.
And, yes. And as Frank Zappa, I think, used to sing about, San Berdou, or Berdino. Well, it all depends. Whatever rolls off the tongue more easily. Hang on.
How did Chuck Berry and the Rolling Stones refer to it? The old standard rock, Route 66. Which one was it? Was it San Berdou or San Bernardino?
It was San Bernardino in I believe in the song Route 66. It's the full proper pronunciation.
Okay.
And then there's a old train song. I don't think it's Chattanooga. It's one of those railroad 40s era songs or something about riding on the train, and San Bernardino's mentioned in that too. But it's whatever works. It goes by all those monikers.
Yeah, I bet you it's a kind of slang, in fact, when it comes right down to it, would be my guess, the San Berdou kind of possibly. So, but anyways, hey, big word of thanks, a shout out here right off the top to Melissa Martell. She is of the Secret Door podcast. You'll know her quite well, of course, Walter. You dropped by and put together a great interview with her a couple months ago regarding another book that you have published, I think, quite recently, if I'm not mistaken, but Napoleon and his esoteric or occult type history. What was the?
Yes.
Just a quick rundown on that. Yeah.
It's the fourth book in this series that we're going to be talking about tonight. Tonight's discussion will be on the first book in the series, Secret Missions 4, The Esoteric Napoleon. In that series, I take particular historical figures and focus on them. This one tonight we're discussing is Juan Cabrillo, of course. Then the second one was Sir Richard Francis Burton. And the third was Ambrose Bierce, who mysteriously disappeared. And the fourth was Napoleon Bonaparte. And I had learned some things about Napoleon that I never knew, that I never imagined. And working on that book changed my perspective on the man completely.
I imagine it would have. So Ambrose Bierce, was he not the author of the so-called Devil's Dictionary?
Yes, indeed. Yes, he was very famous for that. He's also the guy that essentially created that genre of weird fiction that we call, popularly thanks to the TV show, the Twilight Zone, you might say. That weird type of things happen on that cusp of our reality and the next one. He was really the first American writer, who before Lovecraft.
Even Lovecraft, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and very interesting guy. He was a journalist in the 19th century in San Francisco, and yet for what we know about him, I discovered that there's, in a way, some big pockets of things we don't know about him, and that's what intrigued me in working on that particular book, the third one, Destination Carcosa. And so it's an interesting, it has turned out to be an interesting series of books for me, the Secret Missions thing, because it's right up my alley. And I learn things and present things about historical figures that, I myself didn't know about, and certainly a lot of readers didn't know. So it kind of gives a new perspective on these names that you might be just vaguely familiar with.
Absolutely. So, we are restreaming through Facebook tonight, of course. As always, YouTube and D Live. Looks like On the Fence with Musa and Dana Shiver are first to the conversation here on YouTube. So welcome aboard. We're up to nearly 10 folks on YouTube already. That's great to see. You yourself a filmmaker as well too, indie filmmaker. Not quite the caliber. Who wouldn't put Ed Wood to shame, really? But yeah. So, but before we get into that, we could touch on that briefly, and we got to get into this whole Templar business. Of course, that's what you're here for, mainly. But let's also remind listeners that, if I'm not mistaken, I first heard you courtesy of the likes of Adam Go Rightly. Back in the day, he had a bit of a podcast in place, and Radio Mysterioso as well too. Yes, with his first name is Greg Bishop. There we go. Exactly. So
in fact, that's the first show I ever appeared on, was Greg Bishop's Radio Mysterioso.
What was the focus, the theme, and what did you discuss? You remember? Greg
and I met at one of David Childress's Lost Science, Ancient Mysteries. I'm getting that wrong. He does these conferences every year, a couple of times a year. And back in 2004, I attended one of those because I had already met and traveled with David and his group through Mexico a couple of times and through South America. So in '04, I went to this conference and met Greg Bishop there, and we hit it off. And he told me about his podcast and invited me to, head into LA one night. And I started meeting up with him every Sunday night at their little studio, and I kind of became an informal, unofficial co-host for a while there. And that's how I met Adam Gorightly. And of course, as you said, I subsequently appeared on his podcast, and then started writing books and doing more shows. But yeah, it all started for me at Radio Misterioso.
Adam was actually one of our first guests, and I must say it did not go as well as I would have hoped. Total fanboy. I could not help myself. It was terrible. I know if we ever had him back, I'd have the proper frame of mind. As with yourself, I mean, you're a pretty popular guy. You're well known within a whole multitude of circles. Of course, people, they throw out the name Walter Bosley. It's like, oh yeah, we've heard of him. So, but we've got Jordan Maxwell coming up here as well too, which we don't typically like to go. We don't look for the larger established names, to tell you the truth. Right. Once a month, though, we set aside a week once a month where we're definitely open to doing that. But the rest of the time, hashtag WWRHD, what would Robin Hood do? We're all about working on bringing on board independent, up and coming, undiscovered, lesser known voices and personalities. So, but you are someone who I think really could stand to even still reach a larger audience. And that's what we're hoping we're going to, in part, at least manage to accomplish here tonight. So I don't know. Like, why don't we give a bit of a thumbnail sketch, as is typically the case here with our guest, backstory regarding your history as a writer, filmmaker. You worked for the FBI for, what was it, 10, 15, 19 years?
No, my career was divided fairly evenly between, three employers. I just almost 6 years with the FBI, almost the same amount of time with the Air Force, and then my third employer, I was in a security group that did counterterrorism, threat assessment, and support, that kind of thing, in venues all over the world. I mean, I worked in Afghanistan and Iraq. I worked in North Africa, South America, just Eastern Europe, you name it. And before that, of course, I was a special agent with the Air Force OSI, that organization that many UFO people love to boo and hiss. But I was a counter-espionage operations agent with OSI through most of my time with them. And prior to that, when I was a young, wet behind the ears in that business, young 24-year-old, I went to work for the FBI, and I cut my teeth on counterintelligence with them. And worked in, I started in LA, worked in San Francisco on a surveillance team following known and suspected Soviet agents, and then was trained in Russian and was assigned to Manhattan, where I worked on an undercover squad, and we would listen to FISA wiretaps of, again, known or suspected Soviet agents working in Manhattan. And from there, I then, of course, went into the Air Force, as I said before, and, spent 19 and a half years, if you count a contract I worked under where I was doing security background investigations. You have folks that need a security background, they have to have, or a security clearance, they have to have a background investigation. I was doing that for about a year and a half. So that rounded me out to about 19 and a half years in national security. And I figured, that's enough. It's time to start writing, seriously, and pursue the writing and publishing. I had started a publishing company in 2002, the Lost Continent Library, and it was focused on classic adventure fiction and entertainment, that kind of thing. I had no intention to write nonfiction back then. In fact, I started writing in junior high and wrote all through high school, short stories, that kind of thing. I attempted my first screenplay, feature-length screenplay, when I was in my freshman in college. Wrote a few scripts in college. But after college, I briefly worked in the movie business as a production assistant and didn't like that. I decided, well, I'll pursue the writing while I go do this other thing. I had a mentor who was an uncle of mine, one of my mom's brothers, and he, by the time he retired, he had spent over 40 years in the intelligence community. He started Army Special Ops back in the 50s, and he got a hold of me in the 80s, and he's the one that really moved me towards this working for the FBI, and that really intrigued me, of course. So I did that for those number of years, but all through those years, I continued to write screenplays and wrote a novel. In the late 90s, I got an agent for the screenwriting. I was still in the Air Force, but I had an agent. One script placed in a film festival screenwriting competition. I came real close to selling a couple of the scripts to actors who produce their own stuff. Michael Pare was one of those guys. If you're familiar with him, remember him from Eddie and the Cruisers and the Philadelphia Experiment. But just didn't quite make any sales or anything there. And it was in 2005 when I left my career in the national security stuff and decided to focus on making the publishing company, which at that time I'd had for 3 years, and I'd published a couple of other authors. I decided to make a go with that. And while talking one night with Greg on Radio Mysterioso about weird stuff regarding Disneyland, of all places, I got the idea that, maybe I need to write a book about weird Disneyland. And so in 2006, I started that. I think I came out with that book in 2008, and that was my first nonfiction book. And by the time that came out, I had stumbled, you might say, into the very strange territory that I call the Empire of the Wheel, of which I've written 3 books under that banner. And I was off to the races. By that time, I was in that, and those books ended up being the next nonfiction books that I would write. And the one we're going to talk about tonight followed on the third Empire of the Wheel book within, I think, 45 days. I had been doing the research for a few years, but I decided to go ahead and write about Juan Cabrillo and these Templars and this weird stuff going on with this. So the nonfiction for me just kind of exploded. And although I do still write fiction and publish it, my primary work has been this nonfiction on all this weird stuff I seem to find and stumble upon. And oddly, all of my nonfiction, in a way, is all connected. If we sat down and went through all my books, I could show you where one book led to, this other find over here, and that ended up being a book and such. So it's been a very interesting journey. I'll say that.
So it definitely sounds like it. And before we get into the book once again, OSI, that acronym, Office of Special Intelligence, is that correct?
The Office of Special Investigation.
Okay, so what I'm thinking, I'm just off at another question I had for you then, was any kind of X-File type activity in the course of your time with the government, FBI in particular?
The closest to that, when I was an Air Force agent, because of what I did, counterintelligence and counterespionage operations in particular, I had to have a pretty respectable level of clearance, because I would be exposed to and be dealing with Air Force, classified Air Force technology on a daily basis. So the way it works is that you get what we call cleared for weird, and you get that clearance level, and so that anything you're exposed to in the course of your work up to your level, you're good to go. They know that, okay, if you've got to go into the vault, or you got to go over to this, rocket design unit or this aircraft design unit, and you're going to see something, or you got to look at some files or something, they know your clearance level, and they know that you're okay to see their stuff, and of course you're trusted, because you're in the system, so to speak. Now, my day-to-day work was to protect this Air Force technology and these units and such from foreign intelligence service interest or observation or espionage. So that was the primary focus. But in the course of that, because of the clearance and because of the technology, now when you get into counter-espionage operations, I can't go into too much detail there, but you are using classified technical information operationally, I'll put it that way. You're using that stuff operationally. So you see things that are pretty impressive, that give you an insider's view as to, what the Air Force is doing, what the capabilities really are, what there really is in the way of the technology. So as kind of a side thing, you can be exposed to the things that people would categorize as, X-Files type stuff. There is a unit in OSI whose full-time charter, full-time job is to protect the special programs where the technology is concerned, and one of their playgrounds, included, what was Area 51. And those are the OSI agents. They know everything about all of this, what we're talking about with the Air Force technology, the secret tech, because that's their main charter. My main charter, I was at Wright-Patterson for 3 years, which is, of course, Wright-Patterson. And even though I had a pretty high level clearance, my main job was to run counter-espionage operations, which is essentially double agentry, was to try to convince a foreign intelligence service that, a guy that I would send to them was really a spy when he's not. He's doubling for us. That was my main thing. And I would, you use the technology information for, a purpose like that. So a little bit different what I did than what the special program agents did, but there's some overlap in what you learn about and see and such. But I will say this, that this is why when I talk about UFOs, this is why my personal opinion is that 90% of what people are seeing and reporting is very likely classified human technology, which still leaves 10% that could be from another world. And when you look at the numbers, I mean, if you got MUFON last year in 2019 reported roughly, I think, 5,000 UFO reports in one given month, April of 2019, okay? Now, let's say that only 10% of those could be explained otherworldly, okay? That's still, that's 500 UFO sightings, right? And even if only 1% of those was from another world, well, all it takes is one. So when people hear me say the 90% number, they get their feathers ruffled, oh, you're just a debunker. I'm like, no. I'm still saying there could be hundreds that are from some other place, and you only need the one to prove that. And if there's hundreds, I'm still a believer in, the off-world UFO thing. But my time in the Air Force is why I say that people are seeing stuff that, it's advanced technology, and human memory's a funny thing. Witnesses will see stuff and their memory will exaggerate it a little bit in their excitement. So they might have been seeing something they'd never seen before that was doing something that they weren't used to, but it might not have been doing quite what they're describing it. So, these kinds of things happen. But that's the extent of my X-Filey experience of it.
Are you familiar with the interview that Art Bell actually did with Bill Burns a number of years ago? Mm-hmm. It looks like it's about 4 years ago here, according to what we're seeing on YouTube. But talk to him regarding this business of Malachi Martin and his role as far as acting as an intermediary in retrieval of Well, what should we say? The type of technology which is, in some cases, maybe out of this world, perhaps. That kind of deal. Anyways, I don't know if you heard about that, but it's a little bit off the sort of kind of topic for where we're wanting to steer things tonight. But
Sure.
just thought I'd bounce that off you. You did hear the interview, though. You know about that one. Is that right?
Oh, no, I don't. And it's very intriguing. You mentioned if Malachi Martin was allegedly involved with the retrieval, that's very fascinating. And I would like to pull that thread, maybe you can send me a link to that or something. And after, the show, because that's a very intriguing subject there. I'd love to hear what Martin thought of his involvement in that.
Yeah, we're doing that right now, as a matter of fact. So, okay. Well, on with the show. Not that we haven't unpacked a lot of great information there as far as backstory and your personal history is concerned. A lot of great strands there, of course, and other avenues we could pursue as far as the conversation is concerned. But in the meantime, yes, On the Trail of the Templars, that is not the exact title of your book. Rather, it is Secret Missions, The Hidden Legacy of Old California. I think you said this is the fourth and perhaps final installment of the series?
No, this is the first.
It was the first. Okay, there we go.
The first of the Secret Missions, and Napoleon is the fourth, and it's only volume 1 of Napoleon. I'm working on a complete second volume of the Napoleon material because there's so much, and I will continue going with the Secret Missions series as long as I have figures to write about legitimately. I really enjoy this series.
Well, and you actually have done some collaboration with Richard Spence, have you not?
Yes, the first Empire of the Wheel book. I wrote with Richard because I had been going to him for research as a reference source, and he was so intrigued with what I was researching and provided me with just a ton of information that I finally thought, God, maybe he'd like to write this thing with me, because I really enjoyed his book Secret Agent 666 about Aleister Crowley. So, and Crowley, of course, factors into the Empire of the Wheel mystery. That's why I initially contacted him. So, yeah, we ended up writing that first book together, and turned out well. It could probably use a new editorial polish, because I'm a better nonfiction writer now than than I was back then. But that book has been a very good part of my collection, that's for sure. And I credit Rick with helping in that department, that's for sure.
We're seeing it actually right now as we speak in the slideshow. So how about that for synchronicity?
We sold the TV and film rights, and it is presently being developed into a dramatic TV series. So we're
congratulations. Excellent.
Well, thank you. That's something that they've been working on for a couple of years, and it's progressing very nicely.
That should help to pad the personal bank account a little more, I suppose.
Oh, yeah, indeed. When that happens, I'll tell you, I don't know if you've ever heard the story that Stephen King used to like to tell about his career, but before he published Carrie, he likes to tell the story about he and his wife, and they had 2 little children, and they lived in a crappy trailer, and she was working 2 shifts at a laundry and a donut shop, and he, so that he could just write, and they were poor, and they didn't have a car that worked, and on and so forth. And
he threw the manuscript. He threw the manuscript in the garbage.
Exactly. Yeah, he hated it. Threw it in the trash. She got mad and said, "Oh no, you don't." She sent it to his editor, and sure enough, that was the one that the check that they sent to him for the advance. He said it didn't make them a millionaire, but their life was they were so broke that it changed their life significantly. And so I like to tell that story. My situation ain't as bad as what he described, but it's one of those things where you're absolutely right. When that one finally hits, it will be a good thing, because I'm like everybody else out there. Most people listening, I got to scrape by month to month with this crazy writing thing.
All right. So what was it then that first piqued your interest as far as the Templar story was concerned, and got you engaged basically out there on the trail of the Templars.
Well, like everyone else, if you're interested in these ancient mysteries and all this stuff, you can't help but read about the intriguing questions about the Knights Templar. We all know how they were persecuted by the Pope and the French crown in the early 14th century. We know that when they were founded, the original 9 knights went to Jerusalem, and they discovered something underneath during their excavations of Solomon's temple. And, you learned that they didn't seem to be there so much to protect pilgrims as they were to dig into that temple. So, you learn that classic story that they found something that not only ended up leading to great wealth, but also great power and autonomous power. They didn't really have to answer to anyone if they didn't want to. And that, of course, led to the jealousy and why they were broken up and persecuted ultimately. But, you also learn about how they had kind of a role, but not a role in the infamous Fourth Crusade to Constantinople, in which the library of ancient documents was sacked. And it is believed that what we would call lost knowledge of the ancient world and technologies and stuff kind of disappeared during that sacking. And it is suspected that the Knights Templar, received some of that. And it's suggested that they might have found in the temple something that led to a desire to get their hands on what was in Constantinople. So, they were pulling threads, and it all had to do with their understanding of, that forgotten aspect of the ancient world. So all of this stuff, we know this stuff. Anybody who's followed the Templars knows that. And it's very intriguing. So I was intrigued with them to begin with. And what happened was, specifically that led to this book, was that Juan Cabrillo started popping up in my research, what became the Empire of the Wheel research. And I was just setting, I was making notes and setting it aside. And then Joan of Arc, the Sword of Joan of Arc, pops up. And at first, I'm not making any connections between Juan Cabrillo and this Sword of Joan of Arc. But as I'm pulling threads with that, this story of Joan of Arc becomes more intriguing and gives me this gut feeling that there was Templar involvement. Why? Because, well, she had this sword. She came about it from a very interesting way, according to her. She was in contact with 3 saints, she claimed. And one of them, St. Catherine of Alexandria, told her where this sword was located, and behind the altar of a particular church in France. So she goes and she digs this sword up, and then the history starts from there. She, of course, becomes the great Joan of Arc and is undefeated in battle. And whenever she carries the sword, she can't be hurt, she can't be defeated, her army can't be defeated, she can't be killed as long as she has this sword. Very much like Excalibur with King Arthur, of course. Well, what really jumped out at me was, by the time I dug into Joan of Arc's story and this business with the sword, I already knew who St. Catherine of Alexandria really was. There was no such thing as a St. Catherine of Alexandria. That was all made up by the Catholic Church, taking the biography of the very historical Hypatia of Alexandria and using that bio to cover the worship of the goddess Hecate, the very ancient chthonic goddess Hecate. That's who Catherine of Alexandria really was or is. And Rick and I discussed that in the first Empire of the Wheel book. So here I am looking at this Joan of Arc story and thinking, my gosh, this ancient goddess Hecate, this entity, is the one that tells this girl to go dig up this sword. And then, of course, when Joan is captured, she does not have that sword on her. And if you look at the trial of Joan of Arc, because the transcripts exist, it's fascinating. If you look at the trial of Joan of Arc, England was pushing this trial. And the inquisitors were most obsessed with getting their hands on that sword. They kept asking her, grilling her, where is the sword? And she said, I don't know. I gave it to my brothers. I don't know where the special sword is. And so I found that to be really interesting. And this sword has disappeared from, it's disappeared from history from that time forward. So I thought, well, let's see. She's the 15th century, about 100 years after the Templar persecution. And she had a brother, I think 2 brothers, that were of the knight class. And this sword, not only could it, some people would consider it a holy relic, but it's really this strange, almost occult science relic. And I just got this hunch that, well, what if the Templars got their hands on this? What if her brothers were affiliated with the Knights Templar? They were a French order. Joan, of course, was French. There's that whole French connection going on there. The English want their hands on this. Somebody doesn't want England, to get it. And that made me wonder, might the post-persecution Templars, once they've gone underground, might they have taken possession of the sword first, to safeguard it, to keep it out of the hands of the French crown, to keep it out of the hands of the Vatican and out of the hands of England? Because, if it did have special properties and it was this powerful Excalibur type sword, might the Templars have got their hands on it? And then what would they have done with it? Well, then I thought of, there's those stories about the Templars and knowing about the Americas. And, as we know, many people have done research on the whole theme of Templars in America. Well, what if they brought the sword to, a vault in the Americas, before it opened up, before it became populated with Europeans. And, I kind of followed that thread from there. And I go into my, my wild notion, my speculation that the Templars indeed knew about the Americas. They would maintain a vault here. And I speculate and suggest that perhaps that's where the heart of the Templar treasure that disappeared from France, that disappeared from Europe, that the logical place they would bring it to safeguard would be the Americas, because most Europeans didn't know the Americas were here, and it would be easier for them to safeguard it. So while all these people after their treasure and their knowledge are running around Europe looking for it, it's in the Americas the whole time. This is my speculation, my contribution to the, what were the Templars doing in America hypothesis. And, I just kind of took it from there.
And there is a lot of talk regarding these matters as well, too, that we've heard all throughout the years, of course, that there is some connection to the West, to North America. Mm-hmm. Of course, the missing Templar fleet. I'm not sure if you're going to want to get more into that or not, but before and if you do, William Sinclair, Rosslyn Chapel, all these stories that we've heard. I'd just like to get clear on the you said it was the Fourth Crusade, and one of the stopping points was Constantinople. Of course, the sack of Constantinople by the Ottoman Muslims, 1453, very very famous date. Right. What's the context of things here exactly? When did Joan of Arc? What was her timeline? And on top of that, secondly, now you're really kind of pushing a California angle to things here, which is intriguing. Maybe this treasure was, of course, it wasn't just all located in one place. It was spread out at different points around throughout the New World. But we've all heard the Oak Island angle as well too. But maybe that's where you're going with things as far as the dispersion of items is concerned, the missing Templar treasure. But yeah, Joan of Arc and her timeline, and just backing things up to how that relates to what you've just gone over as far as Constantinople in particular is concerned.
Yeah, the Fourth Crusade was prior to the persecution of the Templars, the breaking up of their order, which was in the first decade of the 14th century. So in the late 13th, in the 13th century is when this Fourth Crusade happened, and originally it was a crusade that was presented as using Constantinople as the launch point further into the east, of course. But a funny thing happened on the way there. The parties involved decided that Constantinople would be the target, of the crusade. So the Knights Templar officially did not involve themselves in the Fourth Crusade beyond providing some ships and supplies and that kind of thing. It was the other European orders like the Teutonic Knights and some of the others that really provided the manpower and got involved in that.
Hospitallers, got to remember the Hospitallers,
yes,
too.
Yes,
Logistics.
The Hospitallers, yes, and but it is generally suspected that the Templars and some of these other orders, but the Templars got their hands on what would have been really secret charts, pre-Columbian charts of the Americas. Okay, the what was called the secret maritime tradition. Those sources that knew and were coming to the Americas prior to Columbus, these would have been their portolans, their charts, and it is believed that those were in the library that was sacked in Constantinople, and that's what the Templars and some other players were after. Specifically the Templars, because it is suspected that they may have found the two pillars of Hiram Abiff that contained all sorts of geographic information about the Earth, about the planet, which it's suspected included knowledge of the then unknown to the masses, the Americas, okay, North and South America. So that's where the Templars in Jerusalem, part of that knowledge that they dug up that made them powerful and rich, it is suspected that may be part of what they learned in Jerusalem was, there are these continents over there, before they were called America, of course, but there's these continents, this other hidden part of the world. And so then subsequent to that, they learned that, okay, in Constantinople, there are probably charts of those territories. And so it is suspected that that's how they got their hands on old, ancient pre-Columbian charts, which then led to, the Templar explorations and expeditions to the Americas, involving, both pre-persecution and post-persecution, the Sinclairs and all that. And then, of course, going over to Oak Island. Ironically, I personally don't think that any Templar treasure was hidden at Oak Island. I do think that that they landed there. It was where they first claimed their claim on the New World. That has to do with the explorers in the British Isles. Each part of Europe would use a different way to claim territories when they would explore. Okay, the French would do this elaborate ceremony. The Spanish would do a religious ceremony. But up in the British Isles, they would plant a garden. They planted a garden. We claim this territory. And in my book that we're talking about tonight, I point out how the oak trees there in Nova Scotia on Oak Island, in my opinion, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, they were brought there and planted. And that is the evidence that, the Sinclair expedition did indeed land there and claim that. But interestingly, I don't think that that's where the Templars vaulted any treasure. That's just my personal opinion based on, looking at that and such. But I do think that then they continued their explorations, and I propose that wherever they did do their first vault, they would move that vault down and across the North American continent as as it opened up and as the population began to expand from Europe, they would have wanted to theoretically, hypothetically, keep their vault away from the masses, out in the middle of nowhere. And so, in my opinion, my suggestion is that they moved their vault or vaults westward as the population grew in North America over the years. And ultimately, they ended up in California. And that's what I propose in the book, very specifically in what we call Mount Rubidoux today in Riverside. And that's where Juan Cabrillo subsequently comes into the whole mix.
This is quite something. So Juan Cabrillo, you did mention Hiram Abiff just a minute or two ago, and immediately in my mind, I'm thinking Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the Knights Templar. What is it? Something like the 28th degree of Scottish Rite Freemasonry is, in fact, it's the Knights Templar degree that is conferred upon. I'm not sure if I have that number right, but they definitely seem to have an affinity with the whole that whole business there. So it really is quite something. I'm not sure if you can speak to that exactly, or how maybe kind of work it into the mix here in a colorful manner. But feel free.
You mean the Masonic angle?
Yeah. As far as the Scottish Rite Masonry is concerned, and the Hiram Abiff business, and then over, of course, Juan Cabrillo, more of a. Now, this is out of Spain, is it? Because we're talking Spanish, an offshoot, really working together hand in glove, So.
Yeah, Juan Cabrillo. By the time we get to Spain and Juan Cabrillo and them exploring the New World in California, what we've got, in my opinion, is the church, primarily the Vatican, and specifically the Jesuits, but the Vatican and other players in Europe wanting to pursue. Where did the Templars end up? More importantly, where did they take their cache of knowledge and this treasure that they had? And I think that part of the exploration of the Americas involved this desire on the part of the Vatican and some of the crown heads of Europe to get their hands on the Templar treasure and the Templar knowledge. And so I think that by the time we get to, for instance, Father Kino, who was actually born Eusebius Kuhn, a German, he was a Jesuit priest, and he came to the Americas. And what's interesting is where he was exploring, was in Arizona. Now, the records say that he was only in eastern Arizona, but I think that, that's what the records say. I think when you look at Father Kino's specialties, he's the kind of guy that was interested in the kinds of thing that we attribute to the Templars. Okay, he was very much a science and tech-minded guy, and the ancient history and ancient mysteries, that kind of thing. And so I think Father Kino was one of the agents, so to speak, that the Vatican sent out looking for any sign of the Templar trail. And by the time we get to Father Kino, in the 17th century, the church and other European forces that want to get their hands on all this, they've heard, they've learned that, the things that we talk about tonight and have talked about, in our times about what did the Templars know about the Americas? When did they know it? How long were they coming over here? So greatly, in my opinion, a lot of the exploration, for instance, that the Spanish explorers did, they were looking just as much for the Templar trail as they were looking for new territory to claim. So, following that, it, of course, continued to lead out west. I mean, yes, there was the search for gold. That was a very real thing that was going on. But I think underneath it, somebody had learned something about what we call the Templar Trail, and they were hot on that Templar Trail, and I think that ultimately led to when Spain decided that they needed to explore what was called Alta California or Upper California, and they had in their employ Juan Cabrillo, who was actually Portuguese. Okay, now the Spanish army, particularly the Navy, would employ these Portuguese guys because they were master navigators. Okay, at that time they were the master navigators. Mm-hmm. And Cabrillo first appears. He's a mystery himself. He first appears on the stage of history. He's already about 19 or 20 years old, and he's part of the Narvaez expedition that's been sent by Spain to arrest Hernan Cortez. Okay, well, they get to Nuevo Spain and what we call Mexico, and Cabrillo and some of the other guys in Narvaez's army decide they kind of like Cortez, and they decide to side with Cortez, and that's what happens there. So Cabrillo ends up a soldier, an officer in Cortez's army. He's part of the conquest of, let me get this right, Tenochtitlan. I got to pronounce that right. What became Mexico City.
The Aztec capital.
Yes.
Okay. Hang on.
The Aztec Empire.
Okay. Before, I mean, we are kind of you're painting a pretty broad picture here, and there's a lot of characters, of course, and locations and particulars that certainly you can see how a book quite easily, could be written and has been written, and perhaps there will be, as with the Napoleon project that you've put together, follow up part 2 of this perhaps. But Father Kino, let's back up to Father Kino. Did you say he was a Jesuit?
Yes.
Okay, because that kind of makes a lot, and in a sense of what we mentioned here with respect to Malachi Martin playing this, supposedly, according to Bill Burns, courtesy of this classic Art Bell interview, which, I mean, you talk about mind-blowing. That really is one standout example of course, the career that Art managed to log over the many years that he was active and a voice on the radio airwaves. But so I guess he would have been this Father Kino, the Malachi Martin of his day, is what it's sounding like.
Yeah, you could say that. He, like I said, he was born in Italy, but he was German. And he studied. Here's what's interesting: he was educated in Innsbruck, Austria, and joined the Jesuits. He started teaching mathematics, astronomy, and natural sciences in Ingolstadt. Now, Ingolstadt is famously connected to alchemists in the history of Frankenstein and the Shelleys and all of that.
Adam Weishaupt?
So
is Adam Weishaupt as well, or are we? I'm not Ingolstadt.
I'm not sure about the Weishaupt connection to Ingolstadt.
Walter, what year are we talking exactly here? Just for time frame.
We're talking. He joined the Jesuits, the Society of Jesuits, in 1665. So we're talking mid-late 17th century.
Thank you.
He around 1681 or 2, he goes to Spain and becomes a missionary and heads to Mexico. He makes astronomical and nautical instruments, so he's an expert in that. He becomes a cartographer on expeditions around what we call Baja, California, of course, today. And he was a missionary to the Pima tribe, and, was known for his explorations in southern Arizona at that time. And for about 25 years, he worked with the local natives of the northern Sonora Desert and southern Arizona, teaching them agriculture and livestock in the, the European brand. And he becomes, one of the things he accomplishes, he becomes known for, is in the 1690s in Arizona. He explores this site, which he called Casa Grande, which is attributed to the Hohokam culture.
Big house, Casa Grande.
Yeah, Casa Grande. Well, Casa Grande, there's a reason to suspect that it was an observatory. In fact, it is generally considered by archaeologists to have been an observatory. Well, what's interesting is when the closer you look at it, you begin to see the possibility that and this is hypothesis at this point, but the possibility that Casa Grande may have had an actual Templar influence in its design and construction. And what that does is suggests, wow, okay, there's possibly the Templar presence in the American Southwest, which what would become the American Southwest. And that, of course, in my opinion, within the framework of my book, that ultimately leads into California. And in my opinion, really the main thing that one of the main things that Juan Cabrillo was looking for when he was sent on the expedition by Spain to Upper California, and that was the Templar trail, the Templar presence. More specifically, I argue, Cabrillo knew that the sword of Joan of Arc was in California, and he went to ultimately take possession of it. That's my big wild-ass hypothesis in this book, and becoming, by the way, a Templar himself. By this time, remember, the Templars are underground, because we're talking Juan Cabrillo's 1540s is this expedition, so it's the early mid-16th century by this time.
Right.
More than 200 years since the persecution.
And when was it? It was around this time that Freemasonry was first emerging on the scene, at least in the modern sense as to what we know it today, more or less. The Grand United Lodge of England and similar in France. How far do they trace it back approximately? Most histories back about to the, I think, 1600s, and then there's some other more esoteric theories that, once again, I mean, Hiram Abiff, the city of Tyre and so forth. They really go, the Greek and the mystery schools and whatnot. But let me just say, Carrie Cassidy was one of the few interviews where I had the chance to actually check out, just to see, do a little bit of, we got to do our legwork here on our end as far as research and seeing how things have been going regarding the coverage that your book has been picking up. And it was one of the few interviews that I actually managed to come across, as we kind of just touched on briefly in the pre-interview. Unfortunately, the audio, the sound quality wasn't all that great. It kind of was in and out, back and forth, and then managed to rectify itself. It's a problem that we occasionally know all too well here ourselves. But there's this whole talk of the Russian River. That's a tie-in, and this business of Juan Cabrillo not being able to find San Francisco Bay. Well, I mean, really? That's a pretty big. That's a big place on X. X marks the spot right there on the map. That's a big. That's a large chunk of.
I don't buy it. I never, when I first was doing the research and really dug into that, I've never bought that Juan Cabrillo missed the opening to the San Francisco, even San Francisco Bay, even with the fog. We know, famously there's fog. We know that, the peninsula kind of comes up. But, when you look on the maps geographically, and, they certainly could find the mouth of a river. But going and coming, they miss the opening to, the San Francisco Bay completely. I don't buy it. It's my contention, and I go into this in the book, that they absolutely did not miss it. See, Cabrillo, here's an interesting thing, and it goes back to the Sinclairs and such, that kind of an old trick that explorers would do when they wanted to go off on a little bit more of a let's call it a little secret mission embedded within the expedition. They would be lost from the rest of the fleet in a storm. I'm putting quotation marks in the air. And that would give them a day or two to go look around wherever they wanted to go privately. And then, of course, they would, the weather would improve, so to speak, and they would meet back up with the fleet. Well, the same thing happened with Cabrillo. Now, he had a little flotilla, I guess you'd call it, just 3 ships in this expedition. And we're told that, due to the weather, his ship, the flagship, gets separated from the other 2 ships for about, I think, 3 or 4 days. And it is during this time where Cabrillo, his flagship is alone, that we're told that he misses the San Francisco Bay when they're hugging the coastline so tight that he's scaring the hell out of his crewmen. Okay. And they go as far north as the mouth of what we call the Russian River, and turn around and come back down, hugging the coastline. Now, even in a fog, you're exploring, you're doing cartography, you're getting the lay of the land. Even in a fog, you're hugging that coastline. You're going to follow that coastline, and you're going to take that eastward or right turn when you're going north, or left turn when you're coming south, and you're going to discover that San Francisco Bay. You just are. But we're told that he missed it both times, going and coming. Well, the 3 or 4 days that his flagship was away from the other 2 ships was plenty of time for him to take a little cruise around that bay and, document it to the extent that he could in that time. And then, gosh, wouldn't you know it, he met up with the other 2 ships later after, having gone south of Monterey and then out to sea. So it's my personal belief that he certainly did explore San Francisco Bay, and that was part of the classified logs. That was part of whatever he was either keeping to himself or was ordered to keep private. Of course, his crew would have known, but they had their ways of everybody's sworn to secrecy and such. But the rest of the story with Cabrillo, his expedition, it gets even weirder, because there are down as they came back south to what we call the California Channel Islands, where Catalina Island is such. We learn later that Juan Cabrillo dies on that part of the journey. There are conflicting stories as to what happened from the crew of the expedition. I mean, these are guys who were on the expedition, and there were 2 or 3 different versions, so they didn't even get their story straight. And these are the guys that were there. And to this day, nobody knows where his remains are buried, which was all I needed. That was the open door I needed for my wild-ass speculation that he faked his death and went inland based on knowledge he had and was given upon becoming a Templar, and took possession of Joan of Arc's sword and became its custodian for the remainder of his life, or until it got passed on to the next custodian. That's what the rest of my book is about.
Okay, before we take a look at that, and thank you very much once again for joining us here this week, Walter. This to this point has been quite amazing, really, and I think really you can see is going to end up, for anyone who manages to get their hands on this book that you've put out, Secret Missions: The Hidden Legacy of Old California, a major page turner. But before we carry on, let's just remind people that you are listening to episode number 182 of Pirate Radio Podcasts. Myself, your host, as always, the show's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder. Yes, we do have Walter Bosley here this go round. Finally, he had been on our radar actually for a couple of years. Given the fact that today is May 1st, we figured it would make perhaps a timing is critical here, of course. So matching May 1st is a big day in world history, world events, and why the hell not take a bit of a step back, a refresher from this Corona apocalypse hysteria that everyone has been either experiencing or just bombarded by, if in fact they follow mainstream media, which I myself do not. Thankfully, no television in at this location in the past nearly decade now. Strictly an internet type deal. But yeah, so let's just give a shout out as well to we're up to as many as 12 now via YouTube. So that's great that we have people engaged here in the chat area, Peanut Gallery, as we often refer to things. Just to remind listeners out there, whether on YouTube, Facebook, or D Live, if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, and there have been a lot of comments coming our way, most definitely. But questions, I'm sure, are something that Walter would be happy to take on board as well. Let us know through the comment section, and we'll see to it that he has a chance to address whatever happens to be on your mind. So, yeah, Joan of Arc, was it? I'm not sure if you've mentioned this yet or not, but Excalibur, probably the most famous sword ever in all of history. Sure. Was this in fact what you suspect she may have had in her possession, or something of a similar
I suspect that Excalibur was a type of sword in its construction, and that this is why England, the authorities in England that were really keen on getting their hands on her and her sword, I think they saw this sword as also an Excalibur sword. And, because that's in their lore, the historical lore, they wanted to get their hands on this particular sword. I think that's why England was just so rabidly pursuing that. Now, because I suspected that this sword of hers was an Excalibur sword, I began to look at her story, and I thought, well, wait a minute. There was a female entity that brought her to the sword. It was also a female entity that brought Arthur, or Merlin, to the sword. And that was the Lady of the Lake. So I began to suspect and wonder, was the Lady of the Lake also Hecate? In Arthurian legend, she's the Lady of the Lake. In Joan's story, she's this St. Catherine of Alexandria, so to speak, but actually both of them being Hecate. And it made the whole thing even more interesting to me. Made me wonder. And I go into the book, my reasons for thinking that the Excalibur sword is a type of sword, why I think that, what the sources are of this idea. There is a researcher, Lance Bernard, who did this very interesting essay about the sword of Joan of Arc and how it was likely the sword of Charles Martel. And the legend is that Charles Martel, when they were besieged by oh gosh, I'm doing a brain dump on the Muslim commanders. Anyway, they were being besieged, and they had to stop, it was during that era where they had to stop the invasion from the east of Europe. And the night before the big battle of Tours, I think, a meteorite falls from the sky after Charles Martel has prayed for God's help. So as the story goes, according to Lance Bernard, Martel and his blacksmith ride out to the site, and he has his blacksmith forge a sword from that meteorite, working all through the night. And this is the sword that Martel carries into battle, and the rest is history. They end up really through a comedy of errors, but they end up defeating the invaders from the east. And because Martel is so grateful, he goes and buries the sword in a church in Faribois, France. And he buries it behind the altar, returning it to God because he asked, for God to give him a miracle. And there's where the sword lays until this St. Catherine of Alexandria, who I think was Hecate, comes to Joan of Arc and tells her to dig the sword up. And with this sword, she will be victorious, just like the Arthurian legend. Well, what's interesting is Lance Bernard gets into, well, if this sword was forged from this meteorite, what are the properties of it? Do the properties support the legend of the thing, seeming to glow, seeming to resonate, being able to cut through, other weapons and such? I do a breakdown of the elements of the sword, and it turns out that there are 12 elements, 12 metals, and that go into this sword. And what's interesting is you have the 12 Knights of the Round Table. So basically, to cut the long story short, I argue that therein is the clue. This 12 Knights of the Round Table actually represents the 12 elements of the sword Excalibur, or the Excalibur type sword. And why this type? Why was Merlin taught about this? What's going on here? Well, this goes back to this ancient lost period of human civilization with this advanced technology and advanced understanding of things that, was lost through time, the stuff that the Templars were fascinated with. So it brings the Templars back into it. So the Templars might have known, all along what the source of Joan's sword actually was and its connection to Excalibur. And so therefore would naturally have presented themselves, in her service, to, of course, take custody of the thing. This is my thinking on this.
Walter,
and,
sorry to jump in. Just one... just to be clear, though, for clarification's sake, Joan actually, there was claims that she was guided to a certain location to retrieve this item, which turned out to be a magical sword. Is that correct?
Which turned out to be the sword she carried. Yes.
That's,
it's
well,
very famous. If you watch,
So where do these?
If you read any,
Go ahead.
If you read any history or biography of Joan of Arc, this is what she claims, is that she was led by 3 saints, primarily St. Catherine of Alexandria, to do what she did, to lead France, against the tyrants, and showed her where the sword was. Yeah, that's part of the Joan of Arc story.
And that the sword itself, it glowed and had the ability to cut right through other forms of metal?
When she wielded it, she was shot in the leg with an arrow, the armor-piercing arrow, and a leg shot. There's a main artery in your leg, right? You get an arrow shot in your leg in those days. You most of the time, people died, and if she got any wounds, they would just be minor. They would not kill her, or they just could never hit her. As long as she carried this sword into battle, she was invincible, and her army would win. In all the battles that she carried the sword that was, known to be special, her armies won, and she was never injured. It was in the first battle she went into where she did not carry that sword was the battle she was captured. When she was captured. So
why did she?
That's part.
Okay, but why did she not carry the sword? Why did she forget to take it with her that day?
Well, did she forget, or was it decided that it was that it was time to get that sword to safety, because it would just be a matter of time before maybe they would get to her? I don't know. See, the question you just asked is what the Vatican, is what the French crown, and what the English in particular would like to have known.
I see, because you're saying, once again, her brothers took it from her.
Yeah, she said she gave it to her brothers, and she doesn't know what happened to it. Nobody knows why exactly, she did not carry the sword into that final go round.
You know,
that's part of the mystery.
It's almost like I could see the brothers, whoever they warriors of an elite caliber, looking at Joan, looking at the sword, saying, that looks a little different. That looks like a special type of item you've got there.
Well,
why don't we take a look? And she never saw it again.
At least one of the brothers may have been a Templar. It could very well have been a Templar
or a
himself,
thief, or some kind of thief as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't think it ended up just being, thieved, because it would have turned up again one way or another.
You're saying that you suspect it was done for safety's sake more than anything, because it's this ancient.
It's whatever their motives were. It would be to keep such a powerful piece of knowledge, technological knowledge, for its day, out of the hands of the corrupt European leaders of the day. Because remember, by that time, this is why you were beginning to have the roots of, what would become the new free world in the Americas. Because by the time of, the 15th century, there were a lot of Europeans that were getting fed up with the status quo and with the power of the Vatican, with the power of the various, monarchies and such. I mean, the Templars were, kind of the beginning of that whole idea of let's go somewhere else and, to heck with old Europe. And so basically the motive, in my opinion, was very likely to just keep that knowledge of the technology of that sword out of the hands of England, France, and the Vatican, and any European leaders. Let's just take it away, because it's if it is, and that's a big if, but if it is indeed a powerful device, a powerful relic, you wouldn't want it in the wrong hands if you are looking at it from a moral or philosophical perspective, and perhaps they were. This is all speculation. We don't know. To this day, we don't know where her sword ended up.
That would indeed seem to be the case. So let's give a shout out here to, we have a number of syndicators, believe it or not, for our show, including Reverend Jim via D Live. We've got Daryl and his Global Enlightenment Radio Network. Big thanks to them, as well as Angel Espino, PSN-radio.com. So thank you to all of you, as has been the case here for the last number of months in particular, picking us up, doing what you can to syndicate the show better, help to spread the word. And we are watching those numbers on YouTube slowly make their way up, basically. So we're increasing to pick up the numbers we need. Almost not quite 1,000 subscribers yet. It's quite an effort here. Who knows if we're gonna actually manage at some point to really break on through in a big way. We'll just have to wait and see. It all depends on what the public thinks, how they feel about things. Is this a show worth dropping in and listening to? I know certainly if we have the likes of and caliber of type of guests, such as what we have here this week, Walter Bosley, of course, that could certainly be the case. But as regular listeners know, we typically go for the more independent, up-and-coming, unheard of, really, underdog-type voices and personalities. Once a month, not a problem, though. We don't mind having someone such as, if they can manage with their schedule and show an interest, Walter, or looks like now even, we got a few other names too coming up here over the course of the next few months. Jordan Maxwell hopefully be showing up at some point. We just got word from him today on that. So things are looking good with respect to having him booked at some point. But yeah, a lot of comments, a lot of activity in the Peanut Gallery area, courtesy of Dana Shiver, Joey Boomer on the fence with Musa, Jennifer Knight, Hail Iris. Is that something that resonates with you in any way? I would presume it would, Walter, the old Discordian salutation. Hail Iris.
I'm not up on. I'm only vaguely familiar with the Discordian culture, so I can only guess what it means.
having spent a little time hanging around with Greg Bishop, of course, that you've probably the topic would have come up a time or two.
My limited exposure
Sure.
has just been through him and Adam Gorightly and such.
Walt, what we see here, courtesy of Mr. Anderson, actually, is you did a great show, I guess, with Nox Mente. It was called the Obeliski. Great stream is what Mr. A is telling us. So he shared that link with us here in the live chat. Let's see, as far as the comments, anything else that really jumps out? A lot of conversation back and forth. People really happy to have you on board here this go around. Joey Boomer saying remnants of Templars all over USA. Oak Island is bogus. Grabbler, whatever that means, but fun to watch. Do you know what grabbler means? I've never heard that term before. Anyways, we'll take a pass on that. And thanks to everyone who has been sharing their links as well, too, to Wikipedia regarding the Knights Templar. The Jesuit tie-in, of course, that's kind of a no-brainer, really. It's pretty predictable sort of stuff, frankly. So Joey Boomer once again claiming that in major portraits around the world of Jesus, he has a Jesuit communist flag. So I don't know if that's the case, but it's something to look into, I suppose. KnightsTemplar.org. History has never been easy to follow. That's the point, it says on the fence with Musa. So we'll pick up and cover the rest of the comments here. Well, in just a few minutes. Of course, we've only got another maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes tops here. Really, we're going to wind things down. It is a 90-minute live stream, Walter, as I think you were made aware prior to us kicking things off here. There is an optional after show. It's 100% completely, there's up to the guest, of course. It all depends on their energy level, their interest, along with whatever their schedule is like, of course, too. But that's something that we put together, and it's offline, and we have it archived in the form of premium content. It's called the Rogues Gallery After Show. Regular listeners know all about it. But having said that, a mention here, shout out just regarding the work that you've done over the last little while with Dark Journalist, and I think that's about it, really. So yeah, Dark Journalist, he's a really well-established, highly someone who definitely does a lot of work on a pretty routine basis, very knowledgeable, and has a lot to offer. So, okay, but back to this business of the Templars. I'm not sure, what would you like to cover just in the last segment of this week's live stream, 10, 15 minutes? Is there anything that we're really missing out on here that you think would help us to better kind of connect the dots as to what you're working on trying to convey over, within the context of your book?
Well, I think we covered the basics, the basic juicy stuff sufficiently enough that the rest that's in the book that we didn't touch on kind of is an incentive for the folks listening if they want to read the book. There's, the details that we kind of passed over or glossed over that really make it all the more rich and support my speculations that I've put out there. One of the things, that we didn't touch on is a part of the book that, I'm kind of personally proud of, and that is I propose my hypothesis as to the answer to the identity of Juan Cabrillo, because historically he, like I said, he appeared on the scene at 19 years old. We don't know his parentage, he himself is a mystery, and then of course he essentially disappeared. We're told that he died. We don't know where his body was, but it's I argue in the book, I lay it out in the book, and I've discussed this in interviews that I'm sure a lot of folks have heard, that Juan Cabrillo was actually a son of Pedro Cabral, the Portuguese explorer credited with claiming what we call Brazil for Portugal, because he arrived and did that, claimed the Brazilian territory at about the time that shortly before Juan Cabrillo would have been born. And I do an analysis of the Cabrillo name and how all that, the declinations work. And I propose that Cabrillo, which is not quite a typical name, in my opinion, was pointing to his parentage, his father, Pedro Cabral, Illo meaning son of Cabral, Cabrillo. And I think that answers the mystery as to why there's never been any birth records of Juan Cabrillo found in either Spain or Portugal. But yet the United States government for a long time has always recognized Cabral as Portuguese, even though there are sources that want to claim him for Spain. Well, I kind of fill in those blanks with a speculation that, well, I think they knew something about Cabrillo being born in the Americas to this Portuguese father, Pedro Cabral, which would, of course, make him Portuguese, and might explain how he, became of the hidalgo or knightly status. Cultural status. Hidalgo, particularly Hidalgo de Sangre, means a knight of the bloodline.
That's right.
The origin of that goes to the Templars. If you were, this is post-persecution, if you could trace your lineage by blood to one of the Templars, you were Hidalgo de Sangre. And when you look at Cabrillo's life, he was recognized as Hidalgo, and I argue he was Hidalgo de Sangre because as a son of Pedro Cabral was a knight of the Order of Christ. The Order of Christ was founded by King Denis I of Portugal during the persecution of the Templars, when the French crown and when the Vatican ordered all European monarchs to arrest the Templars present in their nations. King Denis of Portugal told them to, go pound sand. And he told the Templars in Portugal, you're safe here. We're going to change the name of the order. I'm establishing the Order of Christ. And now all you Templars are in the Order of Christ. So the Order of Christ was really created to embed and safeguard Templars. So there were definitely Hidalgo de Sangre descendant knights in the Order of Christ. And I argue that Pedro Cabral was one of those. And so therefore, if I'm right, Juan Cabrillo was the son of Pedro Cabral, himself Hidalgo de Sangre, that would make Juan Cabrillo Hidalgo de Sangre, or Templar by blood, which then all he would need down the road would be to go through the formal knighting ceremony, which I argue he did following the faking of his death on or near Catalina Island in 1543. And then assumed another identity for the rest of his life.
But why would it be so important? I'm not quite following here. Why would it be so critical for him to fake his death? What was that all about?
If he was, in my opinion, if he was going to be dedicating the rest of his life to being the custodian of the sword of Joan of Arc, that would have been one of the deepest secrets of the surviving Templar order.
Right.
And that he would have been like the old knight in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, right?
Gotcha.
Safeguarding this treasure, specifically that sword.
Sure, that does make sense now. You're right. That is plausible indeed. So one of the terms, were you looking for, there was a word that you were looking for just a number of minutes ago within the context of some conflict with the Muslims, the Ottomans and so forth. Was the term janissary? Was that what you were? It wasn't janissaries.
No,
okay.
I'm doing a complete brain dump.
The brain dump there. But
happens.
you know who the janissaries were, though, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, they were a particular, oh my gosh, I'd talk about another brain dump. And in fact, I had to learn a little bit more about the Janissaries when I was writing the Napoleon book. And I have to tell you, it went in and I guess it flew out the other ear or something. So refresh my memory on the specific definition.
I'm just actually learning this myself because I'm as of late, I have been studying up on the whole history of the Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire, even going as far back as ancient Greece and Rome, which I'd never had spent much time looking into over the years, unfortunately. But a lot of what I have been coming across, it does resonate, and these are the sort of things that do come up repeatedly for anyone who does like to read or watch, documentaries of historical nature. So, but Janissaries were basically, they were Europeans who were taken into servitude, kind of not really slaves, but they were raised to become an elite type warrior class. That
right. I was going to say they were kind of like mercenaries, but not exactly mercenaries because they were impressed into that service. So they were kind of not mercenaries, if I'm getting that right.
And they were the children of, like, the Muslims would raid and pillage and murder, kill as things go, unfortunately, and I'm not sure how much of that. Well, still you find that from time to time, depending where you are. But they would then take the youth, the young boys, and definitely do that, as you said, like a press gang almost sort of deal.
In our times, the African warlords of the 90s and in this early 21st century, they do that. They take the sons of the villages that they raid, and they make soldiers out of them. So it's that goes on in the modern world.
There you go. So, one last point here, really, as far as this business of the Russian River, when that came up in the Carrie Cassidy interview, immediately in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I know where I've heard this before, Bohemian Grove. Is there not a tie-in to? I mean, the Bohemian Grove is not located along the Russian River or in that general vicinity?
Gosh, off the top of my head, I thought it was a little further south, but maybe you're right. I've not really dug into Bohemian Grove in depth. The first time Bohemian Grove, the only time it's popped up in my research, has been with the Ambrose Bierce book, Secret Missions 3, Destination Carcosa. And Bierce was one of the founding members of it, but he very quickly resigned from it when he saw the direction it was going. Ambrose Bierce was a very interesting guy, and he just didn't like the direction it was going. So I didn't pursue further knowledge of Bohemian Grove because I was focusing on Bierce, and Bierce left it. But it would be very interesting if, its location is in that area. I haven't followed that very closely, to be honest.
And Ambrose Bierce himself, wasn't he also a member of the Hellfire Club?
I don't think so.
Okay,
no.
that would be Benjamin Franklin, of course.
Yes, Benjamin Franklin. That was of an earlier.
All right. Well.
Earlier time.
So let's just one more time: Secret Missions: The Hidden Legacy of Old California. This is the first in a series that you have put together here. And where you can be, you've got a great YouTube channel in place now where you do a lot of conversing and so forth. Are you thinking of maybe putting your own type of perhaps live streaming interview show together? Or are you just going to keep it like a solo type project for the time being?
For now, it's a place where my readers and people interested in what I do can come, and once a week, hear my commentary in a very casual presentation. I like that casual dialogue that I've got going with them, and they enjoy it. And I do like to do kind of presented talks. Like I'll go on from for a couple of hours live stream, and for the first 45 minutes to an hour of it, I'll often present a topic, and I like doing that, and then we'll discuss the topic. People ask me questions about that. So I like keeping it, pretty casual that way. I do enough interviews for others, for like your show and other shows that people have the opportunity to hear me talking about, the books and the topics a lot. So that's why I like my own live stream to be just kind of a casual, commentary. And I might even just talk about, like my little film interest or building models or some travel that I did. My regular folks there that view that live stream, they really enjoy it. It helps them, they get to know you, the person, not just me, the person, not just me, Walter, the author. And people really enjoy that. But at the same time, I do like to present the topics. Now, I have read in its entirety this book, Secret Missions, that we're talking about tonight, Hidden Legacy of Old California. I've recorded it, and I intend sometime this year to get it put out as an audiobook. And I've, of course, would be announcing that on my live stream when that does indeed happen, because I've had people ask me about, will I be doing audiobooks? But this particular one, I've read the entire book. It is recorded. I'm just kind of lagging on getting it out there.
Yeah, I think you've in fact got chapter 6 uploaded to your channel this particular moment. That's about it for now. So, all right. Well, let's just remind our audience members then, if we can pull up the website. We did have it here in place just a moment or two ago. For some reason, the computer's wanting to freeze. But lostcontinentlibrary.blogspot.com, empireofthewheel.blogspot.com, Twitter, of course, as well as your Lulu link that we've added there to the show description area.
Yes, the only place that my books are available is print on demand at Lulu. I used to sell at Amazon. I used to be on Kindle. They no longer protect the Kindle file anymore. And I had, a few years ago, I had a book that at the time was new get ripped off. And so I pulled all my books off of Kindle. I will not sell on Amazon because they're not good for small press publishers or indie authors. And I really like the quality of the product that Lulu prints. And, you might have to wait a few days for your book, but it's well worth it. You get a nice quality printed book. But lulu.com is the only place people can get my books.
I guess you could say your work got pirated.
Yeah, it was a book that I came out with a few years back, and I'd been fine. I'd had all my stuff on Kindle up to that time, but that particular one, someone got it, turned it into a PDF, and just started. They spread it around on a forum. Hey, here's Walter Bosley's latest book for free. And, what people don't understand is, I'm a small press guy, right? I'm not published by a major like Random House or whatever, the big publishers are. It's me. I'm a one-man company label. And, when that happens to a small guy like me, that can be kind of devastating, so I just couldn't. I had to yank all my books before it started happening to the others.
Right.
So that's why, and I like the print on demand format. I really do. Again, they put out a nice physical book. You get your money's worth as far as that's concerned, definitely, and it's worth the wait. So
speaking of waiting, we have someone here in this who has been patiently biding their time. Actually, none other than the one and only. He does show up here from time to time, Captain Long John Sinclair. So he's been wanting to just have a quick little conversation with you here. I guess it's not going to take too long. Captain Sinclair, are you there?
I be here, Jaffe. Yes, indeed. Walter Bosley, welcome to the show. It's been some time, and this Templar theme, quite fascinating indeed. So, you and Jaffe have really managed to, I think, knock it out of the park this week, and really appreciate the time, the effort, and I'm sure this book will prove to be a fascinating read, something that most of our listeners will definitely want to get their hands on. Secret Missions, the Hidden Legacy of Old California.
Thank you, Captain. Appreciate that. So, so there we go. Captain Sinclair, and of course you may pick up on the fact of what better surname to have for a pirate captain than Sinclair, if people are able to make that connection. But all right, we're going to get you then, I guess, if you can, to mute out Walter. Whether you stick around for the after show or not, it's completely up to you. Whatever the case may be, we definitely would like to just take a minute or two to bid adieu after we finish the live stream here. So do stick around. It'll just be a couple minutes here as we shut down our operations from this end of things. Is there anything further that we missed out on? I think we covered it all pretty much, and we got your links out there. And
I think we did too. I really appreciate you having me on. It's been great, talking with you about this particular book. I enjoy talking about this book. So thanks again for giving me the opportunity to come on here and share this odd little piece of research.
It is indeed fascinating. So we will just have him mute out and wish him all the best. Happy sailing, as we like to say here, courtesy of the Robin Hood. Hopefully get a chance to touch base with him, whether he does choose to stick around for the Rogues Gallery after show or not. We'll just have to play that one by ear. But in the meantime, yes, let's remind people we got James Heydrich coming up next week as our featured guest. It's going to be a little tricky. He, of course, is the well-known martial artist. A bit of a, he's got some controversy there with his whole story, but it is indeed fascinating. Why no books or documentaries or movies have not been put together covering this man's life story, I have no idea. But we are going to get him on speakerphone. Hopefully the sound quality will be decent enough that won't be too many complaints, courtesy of folks out there in the audience. WPRPN.com is the website address. Sign up is free. Pirate One Radio at protonmail.com is our email address. If you have any PayPal donations you'd like to send our way, remember, of course, Patreon. We're always looking for new supporters over there who can contribute to our tip jar. As Walter was just making clear, we ourselves a very small, independent, online, open-sourced, underground pirate operation. This is not the Kraken that you're dealing with here, folks. This is just a group of freebooters, really, who are volunteering to come together, work together, all for the greater good, of course. And let's not forget, half of everything we do manage to generate here, as far as contributions are concerned, go directly back to the grassroots to help out various charitable causes. Check out all the links we have available there via WPRPN.com as well, too, along with the social media links we have here in this week's show with Walter. It's been a great ride, and we're looking forward to doing it all again, rather this coming Tuesday, of course. Let's not forget, with the news segment we have in place. It looks like Free Cosmos, who we did have here earlier, has he's fallen asleep, or I'm not sure what exactly. Maybe a little overly too much, medication of some kind or another. But whatever the case may be, big word of thanks and appreciation for everyone who did drop by this week. Too many people to name right now. You know who you are, and we really always appreciate any kind of support you can share, including just getting those links out there, leaving your comments, and letting people know more about what it is we have to offer here via the flagship Pirate Radio podcasts, and of course the wider WPRPN People's Pirate Network.com project. On behalf of Captain Long John Sinclair and all the rest of the crew here aboard the Robin Hood, I'm your host, as always, the ship's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder. Who really knows where that Templar treasure ended up being after all these years? I have no idea. It would be something definitely worth managing to try and get your hands on, I suppose, if you were, in fact, found to be worthy. All the best, folks. Tally-ho.
Aye now, there we be. Having carefully looked over each of our navigation panel instruments,
checking every level, switch, dial, cable, knob, and pulley, by all accounts and indications, we indeed see it's time, once again, to drop anchor inside Mystic Bay.
draw an end to yet another week of World Pirate Radio Live.
Remember,
if you're looking for a little more animated online action,
keep in mind we've likely got yet another great free-flowing Rogues Gallery after show
coming up for the next hour in one of our more premium exclusive and remote digital underground online pirate hideaways. Also, if you yourself have a new,
novel, intriguing, or otherwise underreported idea, unique individual, or pressing item in mind, be sure to either drop us a line directly over on WPRPN.com or fire us a quick email
via Pirate One Radio at protonmail.com.
We're always open to exploring fresh creative suggestions, intriguing guest ideas, cutting-edge discussion topics, and captivating themes.
Remember, WPRPN.com member site subdomain links are also always available.
Great for artists, musicians, podcasters, bloggers, social media personalities,
or pretty much just any old landlubber
looking to boost their online visibility, presence, and reach.
Basic personal profile accounts can be launched for just $60 per year.
Staking your claim now helps not only strengthen you and the network, we're also looking out for the little guy. That's right, folks. As much as half of all WPRPN's profits are redirected right back into the hands of the people who really need it most. Community charity. After all, we are the Robin Hood.
You can further embark on your own personal pirate journey by either liking, sharing,
commenting on, subscribing to, or just following us via virtually any mainstream social media platform, including Twitter, Facebook,
Gab,
or Minds.com. So don't forget to become engaged. Until we meet again out on the high digital seas, I'm your host as always, the ship's Chief Communications Officer, Jaffe Ryder. Tally-ho.